Before we start today, I want you to like the video and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you get notifications. So a few years ago, before the 2016 election, I wrote a number of pieces on my personal blog talking about the toxic cocktail, talking about how identity politics and radical ideology would ruin the Democratic Party and burn it up from within. And since then, other people, and I don't think I'm the only person who's talked about it in the past or even before that, but I would say that I was one of the people who predicted it, and a lot of people have joined in since then, and correctly, because the fact is that you have to run a country, and you cannot run a country based on just anguish over identity and racial disparities and past injustices. Those are things that you have to take into account when you're administering a country, and maybe you could make different decisions not to repeat the mistakes of the past. But when you're talking about things that have happened to people or whatever, that's not the job of those running to be your legislator or your president or your governor or whatever. Those people are there in order to administer the state and deliver on follow the rules of the Constitution and execute it. That's executive power. Of course, yes, if you're electing, for example, a senator, you do want them to help change laws that you think are unfair, but they're not there in order to redress your grievances concerning certain injustices. That would be something special. And once you start to have people that are running in order to change the way that things in the past have happened, I think you're bound to be disappointed. So Pete Buttigieg is getting a lot of flack right now for a shooting in his town. Now, while I'm definitely not a supporter of Pete Buttigieg. I don't think he's a good candidate. I think he's better than some of the other clowns that are on the Democratic side, especially Beto, who he's completely destroyed. I would say that the entrance of Pete Buttigieg into the race immediately destroyed Beto's chances at all. I think there's a correlation there. Maybe I'm wrong, but I hear them mentioned in the same breath, because most people who would have voted for Beto are now saying, well, he really has much less in his personality than does Pete Buttigieg. But there's one advantage that Beto has that you don't have with Pete Buttigieg, which is that Pete Buttigieg runs a city. And when you run a city, this is why it's not fair. Life isn't fair. People aren't equal. But Pete Buttigieg will have to live, he has to defend and face the consequences for things that happen in his city, whereas Beto O'Rourke doesn't do anything. Beto O'Rourke is a former congressman. He had zero accountability when he was a congressman, and he will probably never be accountable for anything he does because he's married to a super rich wife. His own family is pretty rich, and he's basically the type of person who has succeeded in life mostly due to connections and not due to any personal merit. And some people say that Donald Trump is the same way, but the fact is that Trump made his way through a number of very difficult financial maneuvers. He was in debt, very serious debt in the 90s. He was able to get out of it. Maybe you fault him for the bankruptcies and all of that, but it's a different experience compared to Beto O'Rourke. But with what Pete Buttigieg is dealing with right now, it's something that neither Trump nor Beto nor some of the other candidates have dealt with now that they're in the race, because a man was killed last week by a police officer in South Bend. Sorry if it's taken up until now to talk about what the real story is. But I do have a problem with that, by the way. But Eric Logan was killed last week. Basically, allegedly he was breaking into cars. From what I saw, it said so. Let's read through this. It says the South Bend police officer who fatally shot a suspect early Sunday did not have his body camera on. That's something I saw earlier, by the way. So that's an important detail, and it's a real problem. If you have your body camera off, it's less indicative that we can take your credibility seriously. But says the man approached him with a knife and ignored multiple orders to stop it, according to the county prosecutor. South Bend Police Sergeant Ryan O'Neill confronted Eric J. Logan in the north parking lot of the Central High apartment complex downtown after a 911 call about car break-ins in the neighborhood. Prosecutor Ken Cotter said at a news conference Monday to outline the investigation by the County Metro Homicide Unit. O'Neill's body camera was not on because he had not activated his emergency lights, according to Cotter and Michael Gregorek, commander of Metro Homicide. Yeah, that's a lame excuse. They explained that the lights, dashboard camera, and body camera are all connected because O'Neill had not activated his lights. Neither his dash cam video nor his body camera went on. I think that is one of the most ridiculous settings to have. So, sometimes if a police officer is on a stakeout or whatever, then you're going to start recording immediately when you turn the lights on. The emergency lights, it's a stupid system, and I don't understand it personally. I would say the body cam and the dash cam should be recording as much as possible. If nothing happens during a shift, it's questionable whether you need to keep the footage. But as long as things can always happen, so why turn anything off? O'Neill did not have his lights on because he was circling the parking lot and searching the area just as he came upon Logan inside a car, according to Cotter. The officer also did not turn on his body camera through an activation button on his wrist because O'Neill initially was checking the identity of the person in the car to determine if it was the owner, Cotter said. Investigators have no video of the incident, saying surrounding buildings did not have working cameras and no witnesses beyond O'Neill. If there's camera footage, I'd love to be able to see that, Cotter said. If there are witnesses, I'd love to be able to hear from them. Logan, who was either 53 or 54, public records list different birth dates, died at Memorial Hospital early Sunday morning shortly after being shot once in the abdomen. He lived near downtown in an apartment with his mother. One of the issues that remained unclear Monday was whether Logan threw the knife at O'Neill. In scanner recordings from the incident, O'Neill was heard telling a dispatcher after the shooting at 3:33 a.m., "Yeah, I'm fine. Guy threw a knife at me." So let's see if we can even hear this. This is what's also stupid, that the audio on these is usually pretty pathetic.
309-311-71, suspicious person.
You signal 4?
Yeah, I'm fine. Another unit here. Guy threw a knife at me.
All right, so there you heard it. He sounded pretty calm when he said it. It says at the news conference, Gregorek repeated that Logan threw the knife, pointing out that O'Neill suffered forearm injuries, but Cotter then clarified the depiction of a knife throw. "I can't tell you if his arm is in a downward position and he gets shot, whether he just releases the knife or he actually throws it," Cotter said. Logan's family members have questioned the police version of events, saying Logan had no history of theft and would not have tried to attack an armed officer with a knife. They've also questioned why he was taken to the hospital in a police cruiser instead of an ambulance. So that in some small areas that could be because the ambulance is already on call and there's not enough units. I would be very interested to figure out why there are those discrepancies. So there's a couple of discrepancies. First was the fact that the body cam was off, and then you also have the fact that the police cruiser took the suspect to the hospital as opposed to an ambulance. So. And then you could talk about whether he was really injured or not. I'm sure that there will have to be evidence presented in court. It says, and then it goes through the sequence and everything. And now there's also talk about appointing a special prosecutor for the case. So look, I would have no problem with a special prosecutor being appointed in this case. It also says that this county prosecutor, Ken Cotter, was a special prosecutor himself in a trial for two Indianapolis police officers, or not a trial, but an investigation of two Indianapolis police officers who were being investigated for the death of an unarmed black man named Aaron Bailey in 2017. And he decided that there was not enough evidence that they didn't feel their life was threatened in order to bring charges. So, look, I think it's a very touchy subject because police officers, I can tell you, are often going on shift, and they do feel the hostility in certain parts of the city, or when they encounter certain people. And I'm not just talking about the black community, by the way. I'm talking about there are parts of the city where you see that there's distrust for the police. I wouldn't say that I live in my city. There are parts of the city where you'd probably say the police definitely don't feel comfortable. But for the most part, I would say that in these shootings where the police end up killing a suspect, it's often very difficult to prove authoritatively that they didn't feel their life was threatened, which is why a lot of the protesters will say, well, is that a good enough threshold in order to absolve them of any guilt? It's a legitimate debate. You know, I'm not a Black Lives Matter supporter at all, but the debate is there because why would you just trust that the officers felt threatened? You don't know that, especially if the body cam footage is not available. That's the important thing. For many years, a lot of police departments resisted, and especially police officer unions, the Patrolmen Benevolent Association, PBA, and the Fraternal Order of Police. They always resisted it because they felt that body cams would increase the danger to police, or they had some sort of lame excuse. And in the end, it hasn't been a problem. In fact, it's actually helped the police because often complaints that would have been filed against them fall apart once body cam footage is released. So this is a protest against so Buttigieg. This is why I'm connecting this to Buttigieg. Obviously, so he's the mayor of South Bend, and he had to suspend his campaign for a bit in order to return to South Bend because there were a lot of people who were making a big deal out of this, which I guess you could easily say yes, it is a big deal because he's running for president and he's had in the past a lot of flack coming at him from people who say, well, South Bend isn't exactly the greatest city for everyone because part of the city, I think it's called the Northwest, I believe, is what I hear is less. Is where the black community lives and they get less services and stuff like that. So he's going to get flack for this because it happened in his city and therefore he's answerable to this. Remember, he's one of only two mayors that's running in the race, and the other mayor is Bill de Blasio, who is the mayor of the biggest city in America. With Buttigieg, I think he gets a lot more scrutiny because he would obviously know that this is happening because he's a mayor of a much smaller town. And in small towns, information travels a lot faster and people hear about it much easier. Here's the protest that happened.
But if I do not have evidence that there has been discipline for racist behavior in the case of one. And you running for president? But if you truly running for president and you black people to vote for you? But if you running for president and you want black people to vote for you? That's a downfall. That's not going to happen. I'm not asking for your vote. You ain't going to get it either.
So that's pretty funny. This is something that's been a problem for Democratic candidates, specifically because many of them want to appeal to the black voter. And my issue with that is, look, I think you should be a president who, I think if you're running for president, you have to be able to show that you're able to stick to your agenda and what you believe in. Okay, some of the people have pandered too hard. The most important one was, I would say, when Bernie Sanders was. I mean, we can show this. It'll take only a second. So this was in 2015 when Bernie was running, and it was in Seattle, and these two land whales came up on the podium.
One of the most progressive cities in the United States of America.
We want an opportunity to address. We want an opportunity on the mic.
Well, ask him.
Get him in check or we're shutting this event down. Now. If you do not listen to her, your event will be shut down right now. Right now. Your decision. Make a decision now.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. Oh.
So you see these idiots arguing with this pair of idiots from. you see morons arguing with morons. It's an event for Bernie Sanders. Nobody's there to hear from the Black Lives Matter people. And they come onto the stage, and they basically let them push them around. This is not a person who you want to be president.
When the war is won,
we are going to let you on the mic. Okay. All right. So we are trying to be reasonable. We are trying to be reasonable. We are trying to be reasonable. We are trying. We're going to let you on the mic. We are going to give you the mic. We will, after Senator Sanders. After Senator Sanders. After Senator Sanders. After Senator Sanders. After Senator Sanders.
Do not tell me what to do.
He basically lets his rally get taken over by these screaming lunatics. That's one of the first memories I have of Bernie Sanders in public. And honestly, I've respected him much less when he actually let them, just take over his event. At a certain point, I think he allowed them to speak for a few minutes. I don't think it's in this video, but you've seen that with him. You've seen that with Hillary Clinton getting confronted with one of their protesters backstage, and she said that I don't even remember what she said. Was that the one where she told a Black Lives Matter supporter that if she has such a problem, maybe she should run for something? You saw that with especially, I think Kamala Harris has been dragged around by the Black Lives Matter people. I want people to understand that Black Lives Matter is an organization that is contemptible. They think that what they're doing is going to foster a safer America for black people, but what they really end up doing often is going and creating more friction with the people in their surrounding communities, and then they want to say, look, it's important, it's important enough to piss off white people in order to help black people, but then nothing gets accomplished. The fact of the matter is that Black Lives Matter couldn't prove that Officer Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown illegally. Okay, they couldn't prove anything. In fact, they made the case much worse, and the rioting in Ferguson aggravated the case. You could probably say that in certain cities they've done more damage than they've done good, especially in mine. In Cleveland, they've slandered people for all sorts of things, including there was a couple that was trying to use Black Lives Matter in order to gain attention in Strongsville, which is where a friend of mine lives. They were trying to say, well, we're being harassed by people in the neighborhood. They're putting up all sorts of racist stuff around our house. And then later it was proven that they had set the stuff up themselves. And then, I think they were trying to avoid either a foreclosure or an eviction. I'd have to check on that. And then even in my case, I know, the synagogue I go to, they filed a complaint against a bar opened by a black person because that bar had a shooting in the back parking lot. Okay, so the bar it's mainly directed for black clientele, and there was a shooting in the parking lot. And people in the neighborhood, including my synagogue, decided, well, we're going to file a complaint because they opened the bar with their, they inherited the liquor license from a previous establishment. Now there's a shooting, and we don't think that it's a safe environment for kids in the neighborhood, because there's kids at the synagogue that are playing in the back alley. There are kids behind their parking lot that are playing because that's where their house is. So they filed the complaint, and then the bar, they go to the liquor license hearing with the Board of Liquor, and they brought a lawyer from Black Lives Matter. And this guy was saying, the whole thing is nothing. It's not about safety. It's not about the fact that the neighborhood has a lot of children in it. It's not about any of that. It's about racism and the fact that they don't want this black bar to be in the neighborhood. But the rest of the businesses on the same strip are all owned by black people. So it doesn't make any sense. There's a black dance studio. There's a black barber shop. There is, I forget what else. There's a United Dairy Farmers. So the fact of the matter is that many times these people, they come in, the Black Lives Matter people, and they try to make an incident racist when it isn't racist, or they try to use racism as their only argument, when in reality they are trying to ignore the fact that people are complex and people have different needs. And the police officers in this case, it could be that it's not warranted that this guy was shot. But you can't pin this on Mayor Pete Buttigieg, because he was out of now look, he's running for president while he's the mayor. So people could say, look, you're abandoning your city in order to run for president. Why don't you worry about the job that you're doing now instead of the job that you're trying to get? That, I think, is a legitimate criticism. But to blame him for supposed racism by a police officer that you don't know what his motive was. You also don't have the footage to prove that the police officer just murdered this guy. You don't know what the hell that guy was doing so late at night around these cars. And now you're going to try to drag Pete Buttigieg because he's now they're going to start calling him racist or whatever. It's not fair. I did see Al Sharpton surprisingly defend him, but the fact is because Sharpton happens to have had a lot of personal contact with Pete Buttigieg. But this is a dangerous time for his campaign. He needs black voters to come out and support him, especially in southern states, in order for him to have any chance to win the nomination. The most important part of this nomination at the moment is not necessarily Iowa or New Hampshire, but South Carolina, because I think whoever wins South Carolina will be able to build momentum in other states like Louisiana or Florida, where there are huge black populations which make up a major part of the Democratic electorate, and they could win the nomination. It's not something that is easy for Pete Buttigieg to navigate. He currently has very, very low support in the black community, and that's one of the reasons that he did that ridiculous thing, drinking the booze out of the bag a couple weeks ago. That's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute and on Minds, as well as on Subscribestar if you want to donate. Those are all at Chef Leopard. You can also subscribe to me on Parler, that's Razor Ray, and on Gab at Starscream85. And I'll talk to you later.